What's going on, internet? So I am back today to talk about another film I watched on Shudder, and I really enjoy watching films on here. And this film that I'm going to talk about today is a little bit older, but one of the reasons why I decided to watch it is I'm in a lot of groups on Facebook and Reddit. I follow a lot of horror accounts, and every now and again I'll see a poster to a film or discussions about a film that really make me intrigued to watch it. And the film today I'm going to talk about has a lot of discourse around it. There are people that really love it. There are people who can't stand it. And so whenever there's a film that's that polarizing, unless it's something like a Serbian film, which I know enough about that, I'm never going to watch it. This film conveys very extreme violence and disturbing elements, which is something that I typically tend to enjoy if it's done in an artistic manner. And the film I'm talking about today is Found. Found is directed by Scott Schirmer. Marty is the ideal fifth grader. He gets good grades, listens to his teachers, and doesn't start trouble in class. But darkness is beginning to fall over Marty's life. The kids in school won't stop picking on him, his parents just don't seem to understand him, and now Marty must grapple with a terrible secret that threatens to destroy his life as he knows it. His big brother is a serial killer. This is a film that I've seen the poster for about 500,000 times. It's one that I've been looking forward to seeing for a while, and one of the reasons why I wanted to watch it is because of the amount of discourse, being that the film is about a serial killer, and it's always fascinating to hear people talk about conveying this type of material in a film. You look at a movie like The House That Jack Built from Lars von Trier, which conveys it in a very dark and sadistic manner where there's really no punches pulled. It's just violent, disturbing crime. And then you look at something more nuanced like The Clove Hitch Killer, which is a film about a serial killer that really restrains itself. Or you look at something like Zodiac that tells a story of serial killers from the perspective of the police and the people investigating this. And films about serial killers have existed for forever, and I know that there's like this discourse of whether or not artists should be able to convey this information. And at the end of the day, for me, a film is a film, and I think that there's purpose behind it and that there's always a reason for it if it's done in an artistic way, whether it's a learning lesson on freaks to look out for or just a way to tell a story about a piece of history. But this is a film that I was more interested in because of how low budget it was and the lengths that the filmmakers had to go to make it. And I enjoyed elements of this film, but overall I have a lot of problems with it, and I can't 100% say I would recommend it to people because of the issues that I have with the film. First thing I will talk about is how impressive it was that they were able to accomplish this movie. There's a lot of visual effects in this that are clearly done on the cheap because they didn't have a lot of money that still work really well. I know a lot of people talk about the final shot of this film, which is incredibly disturbing, and you can tell that there was a lot of time taken into setting that shot up, and there's some scenes during the film conveying the brother's actions, more or less how the younger brother perceives how his brother kills people, that are really disturbing, conveyed very realistically on screen. Those were all executed really well, and I was impressed that on a low budget that people were able to make this work, because as someone who's in film school, it's hard sometimes to see that end vision of making something and creating content. And this was a group of people who had a vision and made it a reality. And although I didn't like a lot about it, I still have to have that admiration for these people for going out and making something that is an attempt to create a piece of art that will resonate with some people. First thing I'll talk about is the performances. The young kid who plays Marty does a good job, but for the most part, the actors and actresses in this film feel like they were brothers, sisters, cousins, friends of the director. They don't seem to have a lot of acting experience. It doesn't even really feel like slice of life realism because it's just reading off a piece of paper a lot of times. The brother who plays the serial killer feels kind of unnatural, like he playing detached a little too much. When he starts to show caring for the brother, it feels like a Hallmark movie or an after-school special, and less like a really gritty film about a serial killer. I could see this being executed on a higher budget and done a lot more efficiently. I was invested enough in the story that even though the acting was pretty lowbrow, that I was still able to stay connected with it. And that's the one thing I did like about the movie, is the way the story is told keeps you engaged enough, really want to stick with these characters. The first thing I want to talk about as far as my dislikes of the film are the way that the extreme acts of violence are conveyed. And I've talked about this before in my horror reviews I've done. I think there are reasons to convey extreme acts of violence on screen, especially if you're trying to say something. I think of a film, Nightingale, directed by Jennifer Kent. This is a film that depicts a really disturbing rape on screen. And the film is about this woman regaining her strength and getting revenge on the person who has stripped her humanity away from her by raping her. And the rape is conveyed on screen, and it's very disturbing, and it's disgusting, and it's horrible to have to watch as a viewer. But the reason why Jennifer Kent conveyed these things on the screen is to tell a story and to open people's eyes up to something that really happens, that are detached from reality and might not have come into contact with this, or don't read the news, or don't pay attention to stuff. And a lot of times in film, what artists do is they convey really harsh subject matter that people might not read about because they don't read the news, or they don't watch TV, or they don't stay connected to the real events of the world, and they use their platform to show these things, to teach people and to educate people who may not come into contact with this material, the real horrors of how people can be. And I think there's a purpose and a meaning behind stuff like that. This movie conveys its extreme acts of violence in a way that feels less demonizing. I look at something like a Friday the 13th film, which has hokey violence where people are getting stabbed by a machete. And through the 80s, there was film critics who would say that this was glorifying violence and teach kids that murdering other people's okay, and that's bullshit. They're schlocky horror films that are done in a tone that is comedic, it's unrealistic, and it's just meant to have a good time. This movie is done in such a grimy, disturbing sort of way that makes it feel like it's almost glorifying these acts of violence and looking at it through a lens of fetishizing it in a way. And that's really the thing that kind of took me out of this and made me uninterested in finishing it, although I push through and watch it. You get to the scene where the kid rented a bunch of VHS films because he's really into horror, and one of the VHS films he wanted was gone from the video store. He finds it in his brother's room, and he starts watching it and imagining his brother doing these horrible things, and he decapitates his head, eats the eyeballs out of the head, and then begins to have sex with the decapitated head. The thing is when you're conveying a serial killer on screen, I can understand wanting to convey it in an extreme way because serial killers have a damaged psyche. They're people who are going to do really extreme things. There's the length of time that it lingers on these shots where it's like, okay, I understand what you're trying to convey, but this just feels like it's too much and like you're holding on it for too long, and it gets into that like Eli Roth territory, or like I said, a Serbian film where there feels like there is no artistic intent other than, hey, we can do this really disgusting, disturbing thing, and so we're going to do it. It's one of the qualms. I love Lars von Trier's films. I think he's a very polarizing filmmaker. He said some really dumb shit in his career that he should have never said. He's a really talented filmmaker, but I look at a film like Antichrist, which I think is an incredibly artful, beautiful piece of cinema that has some moments of violence that I feel like are spent too long on glorifying the violent act and less about what it signifies. This film feels like it glorifies those violent acts to a degree that I just can't get behind. It feels just gross and grimy, and that is one of my biggest problems with the film. My other big qualm with the film is the element of race that is played into this film. It's conveyed very early on that most of the people that this serial killer is killing is black women, and there is no emphasis as to why, other than there's this one really quick scene where they're at a dinner table and the dad uses the N-word multiple times. But what's interesting about it is the older brother, who is the serial killer, has this very detached relationship with his father. They don't talk to each other really. They hate each other. They're not close. And so him picking up on this guy's racist tendencies and enacting them in his violent behavior doesn't really make any sense because of how detached he is from his father. If they were really close and he was building off of this because it's how he was raised, and he thinks that he makes this comment about how he talks about the black people in this film and like how their effect is on society, and it's really gross and it makes you feel disgusting when you're watching it. And obviously there are killers in this world who have targeted people based on their race, and it's horrible and it's disgusting and it's gross that it exists. What I had a problem with is there didn't feel like there was a reason, and I understand with serial killers there isn't necessarily a reason, but why this filmmaker in particular decided to convey that he had these tendencies towards only black women, and it just made me feel really gross, and I did not enjoy that. And I understand there's going to be a lot of people who probably say, well, that's the meaning of the movie, it's supposed to be gross, but there's something about specifically targeting it towards race that makes you feel like there needs to be some kind of validity as to why it's being conveyed. I think about like Mindhunter and the last season of Mindhunter, where a lot of the people who were targeted were young children who were being murdered, and this was obviously something that really happened. This truly happened in Atlanta, Georgia. There's a reason why it's conveyed. Obviously, you could make a film where if people that are African American are being targeted and they're the reason why they're being killed, that there's some kind of underlying emotional message as to why this is bad, why this occurring is gross. Never dwelled on enough, and it's never really explained as to why they're conveying it this way, and I just didn't like that, and it made me feel really gross, and it was not something that I ended up liking because I felt like it was sloppy and poorly thrown together. And yeah, I didn't like that part of the film. Lastly, the thing I want to talk about, which I know this is a product of the times, but there's a lot of homophobic slurs in this film. Obviously, I watch a lot of movies that throw around homophobic slurs. The 2007, 2008, 9, 10, people just threw it around left and right because they thought that it was okay to use it when they yell at people in video games or talk about people in person. And as a society, I feel like we've educated ourselves a little bit more to understand that you don't have to use those type of things to convey anger towards a person or hatred towards a person, because it's discriminatory and awful towards people. And this movie throws it around left and right like it's nothing, and it just adds more on to all the other stuff that I talked about previously, that it just feels really grimy and disgusting. And it was really hard for me to get out of that to appreciate any sort of artfulness to the film, because I don't feel like there is much. I liked the first quarter of this film was my favorite part of it. The last act was all right. By the end, I felt like it was pretty empty and devoid of any actual meaning, and it made me upset that I sat through it. Like I said before, I admire the filmmakers for having a vision, wanting to execute the vision, and with such a low budget being able to do that. But because of the subject matter, the way it's conveyed, and the just overall griminess of it, especially with a lot of the racial elements and the things that exist throughout there, I can't recommend it to anyone. I would say stay away from this film. So have you seen Found? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I did not enjoy this, and I thought that it was kind of gross, and it felt like it fetishized a lot of things that it should definitely not. So I would avoid this movie at all costs. As always, if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel. Helps me out a lot. Lets me know the type of content you're looking for. As always, Internet, thanks so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.